All right, well, welcome back to Hebrew Story Hour. Today we are doing Genesis 33, and this is one of my favorite passages. Of course, coming off of 32, it's really an extension of, because in 32, Jacob was kind of getting ready to meet Esau, and this is the actual encounter. And in between that, he has this wrestling with God that we went over last week. So, Lord bless the reading of his word, Genesis 33. Vayisa Yaakov einav, vayar vahine Esav ba, va'imo arba meot ish, vayachatz et hayeladim al Leah, va'al Rachel, va'al shetei hashefachot. Vayasam et hashefachot ve'et yeladehen rishona ve'et Leah biladeha achronim ve'et Rachel ve'et Yosef achronim. Verse 3, V'hu avar lifnehem v'yishtachu artza Sheva pa'amim ad gishto ad achiv. We'll pause there. Okay, verse 1. So Jacob lifted his eyes and he looked, and behold, Esau was coming. And with him were 400 men. And he divided the children of belonging to Leah and Rachel and the two maidservants, and he put the maidservants, or he placed the maidservants and their children first, and then Leah and her children, and then finally Rachel and Joseph. And then verse 3, and he himself crossed over before them, and he bowed down to the ground 7 times, until he drew near to his brother. Verse 4. Vayarotz Esav likrato, vayechabekehu, vayipol al tzivarav, vayishakehu, vayivku. Verse 5. Vayisa et einav, vayar et hanashim, Ve'et hayeladim vayomer bi'ela lach vayomer hayeladim asher chanan Elohim et avdeka. Verse 6. Vategashna hashefachot heina vayeladehen vatishtachvena. Verse 7. Vategash gam Leah Viladeha vayishtachavu, va'achar nigash Yosef v'Rachel vayishtachavu. Okay, we'll pause there. Verse 4, translating. And Esau ran to meet him, and he embraced him, and he fell on his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. And verse 5, and he lifted his eyes and he looked, and he saw the women and the children, and he said, who are these to you? And he said, the children that God has graciously gifted your servant. And the maidservants drew near, they and their children, and they bowed down. And Leah also drew near, and her children, and they bowed down. And after Joseph and Rachel approached, and they bowed down. And he said, nope, didn't read this. Hebrew, verse 8. Taylor dropped out. All right, verse 8. Vayomer milecha kol hamachaneh hazeh asher pagashti vayomer limtsochen be'enei Adoni. 9. Vayomer Esav, yesh li rav achi, yehi lecha asher lach. Verse 10. Vayomer Yaakov, al na im na matzati chen be'enecha, v'lakachta minchati miyadi, ki al ken ra'iti fanecha kirot panei Elohim, batirtzeni. Verse 11, kach na et birchati asher huvat lach, ki chanani Elohim, v'chi yesh li chol, vayiftzar bo vayikach. Okay, pausing there, going back to verse 8. And he said, Russ on how to translate this, but it's who is all this camp to you that I have met. And he said, to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. And Esau said, oh, there's much to me, my brother. Let there be to you, let what is yours be to you. And he said, Jacob said, no, if I have really found favor in your eyes, you should take my gift from my hand. For since I have seen your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Take my blessing, which has been brought to you, for God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have everything. And he urged him, and he took. Verse 12. Vayomer nisa v'nelecha ve'elecha lenegdecha. 13. Vayomer elav Adoni yodea ki hayeladim rakim. V'hatson v'habakar alot alai. Udfakum yom echad. Vametu kol hatson. Verse 14. Ya'avor na Adoni lifnei avdo. Va'ani et nahala le'iti leregel hamalacha asher lifanai u'leregel hayeladim ad asher avo el Adoni seira. 15. Vayomer Esav atziga na imach or imacha min hayam asher iti. Vayomer lama ze emtzachen be'enei Adoni. Okay, well, pause there. Well, verse 16. Vayashov vayom hahu Esav ledarko seira. Okay, now going back to, I didn't mark my stopping places like I do usually. So where did we leave off? Yeah, okay, so verse 12. Verse 12. Yeah, thank you. And he said, let us journey on and let us go, and I will go ahead of you. And then he said to him, Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and the sheep and the cattle are nursing. It's Allah are a concern to me. The nursing sheep and cattle are concerning me. And if they will press on another day, all the sheep will die. Let my Lord cross over before his servant, and then I will lead myself at a leisurely at the pace of the malacha is evidently livestock here, but workers. So the work, perhaps the livestock, and also who are before me, or which are before me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. Well, verse 15, read to the end here. Vayomer Esav atziga na imacha min ha'am asher iti. Vayomer lama, oh no, I did read this. Let me translate verse 15. And Esau said, let me leave with you one of the people who are with me. And he said, why is this that I've found favor in the eyes of my Lord? And he returned in that day, Esau returned in that day to his way to Seir. Okay, now 17. The Yaakov nasa Sukkota vayivin lo bayit. Ula miknehu asa Sukkot al kain kara. Shem hamakom Sukkot. 18. Vayavo Yaakov Shalem ir Shechem asher be'eretz Canaan bevo'o mitpadan Aram vayichan et penei ha'ir. 19. Vayikin et chelkat hasadeh asher nata sham ocholo miyad b'nei chamor avi shechem b'me'ah kisita. And 20. Vayatziv sham mizbeach vayikra lo el Elohei Yisrael. Okay, translating now with 17. Really is picking up off of 16, so Esau goes his way, but Jacob traveled to Sukkot, and he built in it, or beside it perhaps, a house. And for his flock, or his livestock, he made a Sukkot, a tent of some sort of booth. Therefore, the name of the place is called Sukkot. And Jacob went safely, or maybe in peace, to the city of Shechem, which was in the land of Canaan, which when he entered into it from Padan Aram, and he camped beside the city. In verse 19, he purchased a portion of the field, which, or where he spread out his tent. He purchased it from the hand of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, in exchange for 100 pieces of money, shekitah. And then finally, he raised up, or he made stand there, an altar, and he called there, maybe called to it, in the El, the God of Israel. Usually would probably be called upon the name of the God of Israel, but he called to it, God, O God of Israel. That's it for chapter 33. Kind of a shorter chapter than some of the others that we've been doing. So we have plenty of time for discussion. Any questions or comments to start us off?
During the first probably 4 or 5 verses that you read, my internet died, and so I missed some, and you may have mentioned this. towards the end of verse 4, there's a word that has dots over every letter. What is
Yeah,
that?
that is a great question. So I saw that too. It's pretty unusual. And there's a little, if you have your BHS, then you can look out in the margins. And I know there's a bunch of really small writing there. But on there's kind of like two lines. There's a yod with a dot over it, and then it says nakod, and it has a dot over it, and bachor. So that says basically there's 10 times where there's 10 times in the Pentateuch that have dots like this.
Yeah.
And evidently it's the Masoretes are not adding those dots. They were in the consonantal text that they're adding vowel pointing to. I did look this up in anticipation of, that's not the right book, of this question. And I've got a list of all the others here. We don't have to go and look at them, but if you're interested in looking at like another place, you can see it in like Genesis 18:9. The short answer is we don't know why they're there. Like why, if they are what they're marking. There's various suggestions, including that one suggestion is that they indicated that the dotted letters should be erased. So I'm like, this particular word, right, is he kissed him. So some would say maybe the dots were saying, they didn't have erasers. It's like kind of crossing out a word or something. Others say they indicate textual, kind of similar. The textual tradition was in doubt, suggested that by the rabbinic statement, some say, why are the dots used? Ezra said, if Elijah should come and ask me why I accepted that reading, I can point out that I have dotted letters in the question to show they are suspect. But if he should tell me that the reading is correct, I can remove the dots. So, a question about whether that word should be there, perhaps. Strange though. I mean, I don't know why you would not want Esau kissing Jacob here, or in some of these other places. Like why they would question its originality. It's kind of a really early sign of text criticism, though. It's interesting, like that rabbinic assumption that when Elijah comes back, he's going to make sure that they were reading their Bibles correctly and hold them accountable for it.
This rabbinic tradition, is this in the Talmud? Are we talking early centuries AD?
Yeah, let's see this. Let's see if they cite this. It's in Avot. I think it's in the Talmud. That you have that. I mean, of course, when you have rabbinic tradition, often there's disagreements. This doesn't mean that all of the early Jews thought of the dots this way, but it was just one explanation. You have a few others that are pointing to it. So it's before. So what we're reading, right, is a kind of facsimile of the Leningrad Codex, which is 10th century CE. And of course, it's not like this text is now being composed at that time. It's just the earliest full, complete text that we have of the Hebrew Bible. And they are adopting, when they're adding vowels, they're looking at a consonantal text that they're copying. And evidently that consonantal text would have had these dots in it. So we don't know how far that goes back, but obviously, at least to the time of, 3rd, 4th century CE, when the rabbis were in the Talmud was being composed.
Fascinating. The the New Testament scholars have come to a consensus, it seems, that by the time of the Septuagint writing, 200 BC, there were already two different major textual traditions or copyist traditions. And I was curious how they were, if they were conscious of that. Apparently they are in the early centuries.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's at least two. There really are multiple, how text criticism works like a tree, a text gets copied and then recopied, but at some point there's a division. The Septuagint, is a translation, but it's sometimes reflecting an alternative Hebrew manuscript. And sometimes it's just kind of a freer translation, depends on the book. But certainly there are multiple traditions. And the tradition that the Leningrad Codex is in the Masoretic tradition, but it's really only called that because it's the Masoretic version, but that goes back to the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So like if you look at the second century, there's a lot that's happening around the 2nd century, 3rd century BC, because you have the Septuagint, you also have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then there are books like Ben Sira, or also called it like Ecclesiasticus or Sirach. That's kind of in the same nexus, and it's looking back at scriptures. So that's kind of our earliest manuscript evidence for this kind of thing, right? Yeah, text criticism can go back to that point.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody recently. They were talking about the idea that Hebrew is a word poor language, meaning that there's not a really wide number of words to choose from. And so as a result, the suggestion was that each word can have a pretty wide range of meaning. And I wonder if that might influence why the Septuagint, it seems to be a freer, if you will, translation, like you just mentioned, they may have understood the words better at that time than what we do, or had some tradition behind it. And therefore they're like, well, this is really what they're talking about. I don't know.
Yeah. I push
Really
back a little bit on the Hebrew being word poor. Biblical Hebrew is, because we don't have a spoken language, but I would assume that actual speakers were able to convey their meaning with a lot of precision in ancient Israel. But Greek is Greek marks every object and subject with like particular case files and so on. And Hebrew Semitic languages did have that early, but then it drops out by Hebrew. And Hebrew does tend to be a little bit more context oriented for interpretation. The Septuagint, sometimes we talk about the Septuagint as if it's one, like the whole Greek Bible that came out all at once, but really it's different translators in different places and different times with different approaches to translation. So for example, if you look at the Septuagint of Ezekiel, just to take a couple of prophetic books, Ezekiel we call it a mimetic translation. We would call it a kind of a wooden translation, really trying to represent the Hebrew as best possible, where a book like Jeremiah seems to have a bit more of a theological purpose in how it's being translated. And so just like English translations, some are really trying to demonstrate as close as possible the original meaning or the original languages, and others are a little bit more free to make it good English or whatever. You'll have the same kinds of variation in different scrolls of so really when we talk about the Septuagint, we're dealing with the Pentateuch. This could turn into a lecture on the Septuagint. We probably won't go there, but just really quickly, you have this kind of early tradition, kind of a folkloric story with the copying or the translation of the Pentateuch. There's a letter called the Letter of Aristeas, where they recount the story of 70 translators going into different rooms all at the same time and translating the Pentateuch. This is in Alexandria. And they do the whole thing, and then they come together, and lo and behold, they all have the same exact translation. So that it's a way of affirming the authority of the Greek. In any case, but the Septuagint proper really just pertains to the Pentateuch, but then we kind of generally use the Septuagint to talk about any Greek version of the Hebrew Bible.
And yet that's the overwhelming majority of the New Testament quotes is from that tradition.
Yeah, right. And that's one reason why, I mean, the Septuagint is a Jewish translation, but it's adopted so readily in the Christian interpretation. I think it's one reason that you have this kind of recovery of biblical Hebrew among like contemporary Jewish communities, where they sort of ditch the Septuagint and go back to the Hebrew because the Christians are using the Septuagint.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, this is good stuff. Yeah, great question on the dots. I had to look it up too. You just don't, I think there are 15 occurrences in the whole Hebrew Bible, and 10 of them are in the Pentateuch. That's another thing. The Masoretes are counting all of these things, and they're making notes in the margins about them. Good. Other questions on Genesis 33?
Do you have the list there?
Yeah, I do. Do you want me to give it to you? I can give you a few others. Like
just a sampling.
Okay, well, even just what we've read in Genesis, we've seen Genesis. Now, some of these just will have one dot, like Genesis 16:5. There's, and then Genesis 18:9.
Yeah.
And Genesis 19:33, there's just one dot there. And then the last one in Genesis is Genesis 37:12. And this book gives the word that's over each one. Just a little bit more about this one. He says it's not represented in the Septuagint. Genesis 30, he kissed him is not in this Greek translation. In other cases, however, there's no likelihood that the word is superfluous.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's the story is missing something if he does not only embrace him, but kiss him. Like this kind of full acceptance here.
I was looking at verse 10.
Yeah.
When he says that, it's like seeing the face of God. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's what he said whenever he was at wrestling with the man.
Yeah.
At the close of chapter 32.
Yeah.
Seeing God face to face.
Right. He knows what it's like to see God face to face, and he's having that kind of encounter with Esau. I think it's really significant. It's like one of my favorite verses here in Genesis. Is just this here. The Hebrew is interesting. Like, therefore I have seen your face, and it is like the face of God. Maybe that's not so different. Some of the translations make it more like seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. But anyway, yeah, it's hugely significant that Esau is like this kind of, well, he's acting godly. We could at least say that. And by receiving Jacob in spite of, all that he could, in spite of what Jacob's done to him.
So in verse 4, who is falling on the neck, kissing, weeping? Is Esau doing that to Jacob?
Yeah, that's the way I understand it. It's a familial type of thing, right? And throughout this, Esau is recognizing Jacob as a brother, and Jacob is using all this Adoni, Lord language. So like really submitting himself. This seems to be Esau's. Esau, verse 4 is Esau ran to meet him, and then he embraced him. So Esau shows up by name at the beginning of verse 4. We have seen running to meet people a few times in Genesis. Abraham runs to meet the messengers, or the three guys in chapter 18. Abraham's servant runs to meet, in that story where I forget who is doing the running in the meeting, but in that story where Abraham is meeting with Rebecca and Laban, there's running back and forth. And then also Laban runs out to meet Jacob when Jacob first shows up to town in Padan Aram. So this kind of like it's part of Abraham's story, but it's also seen this kind of throughout the patriarchal stories of eagerness, and usually has positive associations.
I took it as an element of danger that if you were running in the ancient world with their sandals and irregular roads and lack of medical care, you could twist an ankle and be lame for the rest of your life. You didn't run lightly. If you were going to run, there's something really intensely motivating about that.
Right. That's true.
All the way through to the New Testament, when we see Mary Magdalene running from the tomb, the fact that she's running says something very, very different than if an American in the 21st century is running.
Yeah, they're not out for jogs.
Yeah, we
Really?
go out for jogs.
Yeah, there's certainly urgency. I was thinking about Elijah with running. He's the running prophet. He runs long distances, but here it's just here in particular to run to meet another person, which of course this story I definitely think like this, the prodigal son story, parable of Jesus is reflecting the Esau Jacob story here, where Esau, and it's interesting because Esau is the older brother, but in this story he's really like in the parable of the prodigal son, it's the father and the older brother is not accepting, right? But it's sort of riffing off and playing off of the dynamics in the story. The father running to meet the son and welcoming him home. And then also the son, of course, practicing his speech and calling himself servant and looking for a place just to work for his dad. And it's a real parallel here where Esau is like, no, you're my brother. He treats him like an equal.
One other thing that strikes me about this that I haven't figured out, Jacob comes out with what sounds like a transparent lie. I'll follow you to Seir, and then instead he buys property in Sukkot. And Esau seems good with that. Esau doesn't respond to his absence in Seir. Does Esau understand that Jacob being so transparent with this that Esau says, yeah, I get it. Okay, I'll do whatever.
Yeah. I've heard different takes on that. Because this is Jacob coming off of just this significant transformation to Israel, right? He's a new man. He's entering the land. He's submitting himself to Esau, and he's recognizing the grace of God. And then does he switch back to his old self here, this Jacob the liar? Jacob's really not that much changed as we thought. That's one understanding of this. I was just reading in a commentary about this question, and he says another way of taking this is just Jacob being polite, and Esau understands this kind of conventions of politeness. Like, oh, he's making excuses. If I go one more day, all my sheep will die. And Esau picks up on it. And, Esau, because he invites him back, like, let's go together. Let's be together. Let's live side by side. And Esau sort of says, well, maybe that wouldn't be for the best. I think we'll go different ways, but, maybe I'll come to Seir someday. That kind of thing, sort of a polite gesture. And Esau would have understood Jacob as, kind of refusing politely. Then it's not Jacob being deceitful, but
it kind of reminds me of the conversation with what's his name? Ephron, the Hittite that Abraham is buying the field, the cave of Machpelah.
yeah.
Where he's like, let me pay for it. And he goes, no. He goes, no, really, the full price, whatever you say. And he goes, what's 400 shekels, if I'm friends, right, or whatever. Right. He said, okay, he listened to them. So there was sort of a repeat of both sides. And in this one, Esau says it one time, and Jacob responds one time. And there is no second offer from Esau either. He's like, let me leave some men with you. And he goes, no, we got it. And he leaves. So I think maybe there's sort of like a cultural understanding, like one of our ministers was saying in a small West Texas town where he used to preach. He was like, if they didn't invite you 3 times, you're not actually going. He's like, you have to have you should come to our house for lunch. No, we're okay. No, really, we've got plenty of food. No, it's okay. It's not too much trouble. No, we have everything we need, and then you can come. It's like the threefold offer, if you will. So I kind of wonder if there's not something like that here, where both of them drop it after one mention of the thing.
Yeah, I mean, and on the other hand, you have a story where Esau does accept, even in this story, Esau accepts something from Jacob when he's pressing him. Esau finally kind of gives in, but Jacob doesn't give in. And even thinking about the Abraham story, he ends up being the winner of persuading by giving away. That is similar to how Jacob acts toward Esau here. Yeah, it's hard to know, like, some of the conventions and reading into, and that's one of the beautiful things about these patriarchal stories, right? There's kind of, what do we take away from this? The narrator doesn't tell us, oh, Jacob was lying again, or it doesn't tell us, oh, this is just a convention. But later on, Jacob and Esau do come together to bury Isaac. So, and they don't, it's not like Esau brings it up. It's like, why don't you ever come visit me? We don't have that. So it seems like they go their own way and everything is all right. I don't think the story necessarily is throwing shade at Jacob for this kind of insincere, perhaps, I'll be coming on your way eventually.
But it's been 20 years, right? If I understand correctly.
Oh yeah, since yeah.
So
maybe time has just gone by. What convinces Esau? Is it just time, or is it Jacob has really shown sorrow or a recognition of his submission, at least, to Esau. Esau is coming out with 400 men. That's an army.
Yeah.
And so perhaps he came out with the expectation to fight, but he's been met with this, been won over by the graciousness of Jacob. Or, time, no doubt, has something to do with it as well.
Well, you see the angels earlier saying to Jacob, your name will be Israel. It's kind of a future thing. And in this, you see what seems to be a deception. It could be that Rachel was starting to have some problems even earlier, eclampsia, pregnancy. I don't know if she's pregnant. I don't know how long it takes them to move that far.
Right.
But it's not until you were talking about those teraphim, in chapter 35, God says to Jacob, get rid of your household idols, put away the foreign gods. And after that, you don't see Jacob being deceiving to anybody. His kids
Yeah.
don't get the memo. They're deceiving. Abraham was deceiving about going to Egypt. Deborah was deceiving, you know, but you don't see Jacob ever being deceptive after that. And I wonder if the wrestling, what part of it was the deceiving spirit that you were talking about in the Terrapin. I know you call it spirit, attitude. He had just seen his fraternal twin and his father-in-law both want to kill him.
Yeah.
You know, because he followed a deceiving spirit, and he becomes Israel because he wrestles with God, but he comes out ahead on God's side because he gets rid of the attitudes that causes him to be a rotten person to be around. So it could be that he was trying to give back some of the inheritance when he gave him that stuff, and maybe the two of them, after they looked at each other for a while, decided, well, let's give each other some space.
Yeah, if we look at so where he's urging him, this verse 10, right? If I have really found favor in your eyes, you should take my gift, like receive my gift from my hand.
Yeah.
And then he says, because seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. But then in verse 11, it's really what stands out to me is the word barakah. So take my blessing,
Yeah.
which has come to you. So it's talking about the gift, but using the word blessing is really significant in the Jacob story.
Yeah, exactly.
Jacob took Isaac's blessing, and it seems like he's giving it back here. I mean, which I don't know if that's a real possibility. He's at least blessing him in return, Jacob's blessing, or maybe as an extension. You all there? Can you hear me?
But the blessing he stole, and now he's giving it back. That's a really eloquent part of this story. Wow.
I think I lost power for a minute, but it sounds like you guys picked right up where I was leaving off. So sounds good.
I'm just going, wow, this is a really new insight into the nature of Jacob and the whole dynamic of his story. Is this one verse here?
Yeah.
Wow.
I had looked over until this week looking at, I don't remember seeing anyway that he's giving back the blessing in the form of the gift, right? And we've in chapter 31, or we saw, or maybe at 32, where we saw him like sending stuff ahead of, but trying to, and we do see this change in Jacob's life, thinking about his transformation to the very end of Genesis, where he is the one blessing Pharaoh. Like he is the one doing the blessing. He blesses his children. He blesses, of course, Manasseh and Ephraim and so on, that great story, but even blessing Pharaoh. So he becomes one who gives blessings for all along. I mean, just the last chapter, he had God in a headlock and saying, bless me. He's kind of collecting the blessings.
God in headlock.
I mean, you have I think that's what I love about the story is just how transformative it is to meet God, right? Seeing God, encountering God in new ways, and how that really shapes and forms us and spurs us on to not only, it spurs us on to bless others, be maybe more concerned with that than receiving the blessing.
So when Jacob says to his brother, seeing you is like seeing the face of God, he's trying to remind him of the transforming nature of God, that he works to the good.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, Esau doesn't seem to say anything in response to that particular thing, but yeah, he's, at least for the readers, I definitely think we're supposed to see the connection here with chapter 32.
Nice.
Other questions or observations with chapter 33? We have kind of the setup for the next story at the end as he departs and goes to these different places. Sukkot, right? We have just very briefly setting up. It's like an etiology for the place of Sukkot, but then especially focusing in on Shechem, the city of Shechem, and we'll have a character named Shechem. And the next story is the 34:1, Dinah, is the story of Dinah. So the daughter gets some attention here. Not good attention.
I was looking at it's in verse 17 where it talks about Sukkot.
Yeah.
And I know, like, as I'm looking at it, there are different uses of the word, but all three times that it's said in that are different somehow. Is it like proper noun versus setting up a tent, etc.? Or because I know like later on the feast of Sukkot is the feast of booths, tabernacles, what have you, where they do for a week long along with ingathering and so forth. But I would assume that those words are related at least.
Right. So they really are the same words. If you're
Yeah.
just looking at here at 17, you have Sukkota, the last comma's hay on it there is we call it directional hay because he's going to Sukkot. So it's the to part of to Sukkot.
Wow.
So it's still Sukkot, and then you have an additional particle on the end of it. And then the next one is he's referring to tents. He made tents, so the feminine plural of Sukkot or Sukkah, but it's spelled without the vav. And the last time it's spelled with the vav as a place name. So you're right, like there's some variation, but really it's the same word in all three cases for booths or tents. There's another word for tent, so maybe booths is better. Like pens for his livestock. It's a temporary place, right? It gets one verse and then he builds some booths and then moves on and builds and settles down near Shechem.
Well, and that's kind of the nature of the festival of booths, Sukkah,
Right.
is the recollection of the transient nature of during the wilderness. They didn't really stay anywhere; they kept moving.
Right.
And that's what it's supposed to draw back to.
Yeah, and we shouldn't miss how this story is kind of foreshadowing Israel's entrance into the land after the Exodus. And so, and especially a verse like this was talking about booths and Sukkot and all this, the kind of a foreshadowing of the tradition that will come. Jacob is just entered into the land, just crossed the Jordan River, is about to go to Shechem. Shechem is the Canaanites are mentioned right here, right? So he's going to live, and then they're going to have strife with the Canaanites coming up. So there's kind of a parallel between the story of Jacob and the people of Israel and the Exodus, and I guess in the Joshua narrative as well.
Although this record in Genesis is written before the events of Joshua happened.
Right. Well, it definitely happens before. Composition is difficult to say. I mean, you have multiple strands of the story coming together. A later tradition, it's all Mosaic, kind of Moses. There's a Mosaic, I would call it as a Mosaic persona over the whole Pentateuch. But I think it's clear that there are different strands of the story composed at different times that are sort of brought together at a later time period that I would definitely put after the conquest. So it's really hard with Old Testament narratives, well, just texts, to know much about dates of composition and authorship and things like this. But I imagine that Genesis is being written, or at least brought together. Maybe there are different texts brought together, but in a time that's, I mean, at least I think when there are kings in Judah and Israel, at least the time of the United Monarchy.
Sir Isaac Newton wrote so in his own notes his theory about how these different traditions happened, and that seemed to be a faith-based higher criticism that I really appreciated. He attributed the editing to Samuel first.
Okay.
That was Samuel's response to having lost the Ark of the Covenant with the original Torah inside. When he got it back, he said, this is too dangerous to have only one copy of this, and so made multiple copies and put them in different places to preserve that. That was Sir Isaac Newton's speculation.
Yeah.
And then he added to that the role of Ezra as the government employee for Persia, who was responsible for collecting and teaching. And he wrote that as well. In Newton's mind, both Samuel and Ezra had the benefit of the Holy Spirit making sure their writings were accurate.
Yeah.
And that yet gave a later textual tradition, yet later, like referring to a place by a later place name. But the original text, other than those language updates, was still traced back to the author claimed in the New Testament, to Moses.
Yeah, of course, this is a whole field of study of source criticism, and as you mentioned, higher criticism, and you use the word speculation, and there is a lot of speculation, and it's good. I mean, we have the text that we have, I think, by the will of God, and to some degree, that's satisfying to me. And it's interesting how maybe we get these stories and when and so on, but yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty with it. David?
Just a quick follow-up to that. Have you seen the news about the discovery of some ancient Hebrew at Mount Ebal? I know it's not been peer-reviewed and we got to wait on that, but I was wondering if it does turn out to be true, how big of a deal is that?
Yeah, I think they're dating it potentially to the 13th century, which is about the time of the settlement of Israel. And they're saying it's Hebrew. That would be super significant just for linguistics. Like our earliest Hebrew texts are from the 9th century. Some might say 10th century BC. So it would be really significant to have a Hebrew text of any kind for anywhere from the 13th century. So we're it's a curse tablet, right? So it's just have like curse. They're also saying that it has the name Yahweh.
Yes, what it says. Yeah.
If that's right, and if it dates to that time period, that's really significant because our first occurrence of the word Yahweh is from the 8th century as far as inscriptions go. So it doesn't mean, I mean, I certainly think the name Yahweh was being evoked long before that, but it would kind of substantiate that a little bit in the historical record. But scholars will, sometimes I just wait for scholars who are like into epigraphy and dating texts and for them to have their debates, and then we'll see about it. But yeah, it's really exciting, potentially.
Lance, I put the information on thorium in the chat if anyone wants to.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. If you're interested in chasing some of that down, take a look. Hang on. Sorry, I don't want to share this. I clicked the wrong thing. And stop share. Okay. Thank you. If we're about up with our time. So, but if you want to look at that link or hang out for a few more minutes, that's fine. But we'll close out Hebrew Story Hour here. I think because of my power surge, the video itself, not that you all go back and look at the videos, but it'll get cut off. So you got in for the extra. Any case, thank you all for your participation. It's been always enjoyable for me. We're going to
Don't call it got in for the extra, say we got the premium
get
content.
the premium, the bonus, the premium. We're going to do, I'm definitely going to do the next couple of weeks. So we're going to do chapter 34 next week, and then 35 that takes us to the end of April. And then I think I'm going to break, at least a break for the summer. So I don't know about I've really enjoyed this. You all who have been regular with this, it's been awesome. We'll see what the future holds for Hebrew Story Hour, but if you're on Facebook, I'll still kind of update some things there, or you guys can interact with me there, or always feel free to email me. But anyway, we have a couple of more weeks. We're going to go through the end of April and that'll take us up through the end of, well, it's not the end of the Jacob story, but it's to the genealogy before we get to kind of the Joseph narratives. So that's the plan for the next few weeks.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Len.
Adonai Machem. Thank you all.
Okay.